name's Caroline Hughes. I'm a biologist at LPC. If you've participated in the Looncam chat at all this season, you might have talked to me there.
I'm Kaylee. I'm a seasonal field biologist at LPC this summer.
And you may have also talked to Kaylee in chat. She was there a couple times. So today we are cleaning up the nest bowl. We do this with every nest that we document in the state. At this nest, both eggs hatched, and so we really just have egg shells to collect. In some cases, one or both eggs don't hatch, and then we collect the eggs as well. But here we're just picking up the shells today and the membranes. We saw on the camera yesterday that the loons took part of the shell, a big chunk of it, and dropped it in the water. That's something that we've observed them doing quite a bit at different nests. And we're not totally sure why they do it, but one hypothesis is that they might be trying to deter predators or trying to hide the evidence of a hatch so that predators don't know where the nest is or can't find the nest. So Kaylee's going to go ahead and collect these shells. At LPC, we don't do too much with the shells. We archive them for potential further thickness testing, but we don't do any contaminant testing on shells. Contaminant testing is really just for whole eggs because they have to test the contents rather than the shells. So the reason that we collect the shells is, number one, to have those archived in case we do any potential future testing on eggshell thickness, but it's also to help ourselves out in the future. If we leave shells behind on a nest bowl, then the next year when we go back, it's hard to tell if those shells are from last year or if they might be from, a failed nest that we missed early on. So there's sort of a two-part purpose to collecting the shells. I'm going to pull up my phone just in case any folks are asking questions on our live chat. It's pretty windy out today, so we haven't been able to go out and check on the family, but we do have a report from one of our volunteers on the lake from last night that they saw the family together, all four, both chicks and the parents, fishing and getting along well. So it seems like there isn't much sibling rivalry going on with these chicks, at least not yet. And that's good because that's something we had worried about, because both of the eggs, they were laid almost 3 full days apart, and if they had hatched 3 full days apart, it's possible that one chick would have been a lot bigger than the other and might have beat on it. But as it was, the second chick was hatched about 24 hours after the first, which is within the normal range. And it was able to sort of catch up on its sibling. It got a lot of one-on-one attention from the female loon yesterday. And so they seem to not be picking on each other just yet, which is a great sign. It looks like I'm not able to actually view the questions in the Q&A, the chat. So, Bill, I don't know what we can do about that. Yeah, I'm just not seeing the chat. I guess since I can't see the chat, I can just talk a little bit about what we're finding here. So Kaylee just collected most, if not all, of the eggshell pieces. She also collected some eggshell membranes. So I'm just going to pull a membrane out now and show it to you guys, although you've probably seen it on live cams before. So this is the membrane. It's what lines the inside of the eggshell. And in cases where we get to a nest and the hatch or the failure has already happened, the state of the membrane can really help us determine what went on there. So typically when we have a successful hatch, you get really, really big chunks of membrane like this, and they're no longer attached to the inside of the eggshell. Whereas if you have a predation event, we typically find very small chunks of eggshell with membrane pretty much totally adhered to the back of it. So the state of that membrane can really help us determine whether chicks might have hatched there or whether that nest might have resulted in a failure. In cases where, the chicks hatch but disappear very quickly after hatch. And I'm still getting no chat for some reason. How big is the nest platform? So this one I think is about 4 feet by 4 feet. That's our typical size. The size has changed over the years, so we do have some really monster rafts out there that are, 5 by 5 feet, but this one is a 4 by 4, and that's our standard size that we're making now. I know there were a lot of questions over the course of the Looncam about the height of the cover, and I don't have a measuring tape with me to measure exactly how tall this one is. But more recently, we've been making them a little bit lower. We try to get that cover, the distance between the platform of the raft and the cover to be somewhere between 21 and 24 inches. And I think the idea behind that is that on really windy lakes or, places that just don't have as much protection, a taller cover like this can get kind of caught in the wind and the raft will move around a little bit more. So the lower cover just makes them a little bit more aerodynamic and less likely to be blown around. Yeah, so sibling rivalry is something that is really hard for us to watch as humans, but it's really important to note that that's something that developed in loons as a way to ensure that at least one chick will survive in years where there's not a lot of food. So typically the eggs are laid 12 to 24 hours apart, although as we saw on this Looncam that it can sometimes be up to three plus days. And because one egg is laid earlier, that first egg tends to hatch earlier, usually 12 to 24, but even up to 48 hours before its sibling. And because that chick hatched earlier, it's fed, and so it has a day or two's worth of feeding on its sibling. It's bigger, it's stronger, and that chick is then able to make sure that whenever feeding is going on, it gets fed first. So it will sort of peck its sibling into submission and let the sibling know that it's not allowed to eat until that first chick has had its fill. And again, that's really hard for us to watch as humans, but in a year where there's not a lot of fish, what that's doing is making it so that all of those parents' efforts are going towards sustaining that first chick, and the second chick might die, but that's in those cases better than both chicks only getting half as much as they need and both dying. So hard to watch, but something that developed out of necessity in loons. And it doesn't happen at every two chick brood, I should say. About 40% of our pairs that hatch two chicks manage to fledge two chicks. And so, even with sibling rivalry and other pressures, it is possible for loons to hatch and fledge two chicks. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't have an exact number. We have a staff meeting on Tuesday where, we'll be checking in with all the biologists and, totaling up our chick numbers and our numbers of active nests that are still in the state. I know we've had more than 15 nests hatch, but hard to say how many chicks. And we're really getting into the part of the summer now where the chicks are going to start hatching pretty soon and sort of en masse. We're expecting a lot of chicks to be hatched or be on the verge of hatching by 4th of July. Yeah, so this year we haven't had many yet, so knock on wood on that. We had a couple early on in the winter. We had some loons get iced in, or in March there was a really bizarre rescue where a loon crash landed on a lake in the Sunapee region, and we're not totally sure where it was coming from. It probably was not from that lake. It seems like it crashed while it was migrating. More recently, we did a rescue of a loon that had gotten into a fight with another loon and was badly injured and beaching itself. So we took that loon for a radiograph, we did blood tests, and then we released it onto a small, quiet pond close to where it was rescued. And Kaylee's actually been doing the monitoring of that loon. We've gone back a couple times a week to check on it and just make sure that it's getting better and not worse. So I think the first couple of days, Kaylee, you were seeing the loon doing a lot of sleeping, right, which is pretty typical after we have a rescue like that. That loon had been in a fight, it was exhausted, it had been through a lot. But more recently, we've been seeing it do a lot more diving and calling and acting more like a loon should, which is good. It seems to be on the mend, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We have had a couple reports of tangled loons that we're keeping an eye on. We haven't been able to catch them yet. Unfortunately, with tangled loons, you have about a 25% chance of catching them, especially early on in their entanglement before they get weakened. You know, they don't know that we're trying to help, and so they see you as a threat when you're approaching them with your big net, and they dive to get away. And a lot of the time with tangled loons, it takes a while before they're weakened enough for us to be able to catch them. So there are a couple tangled loons in the state that we're keeping our eye on, and just haven't been able to catch yet. And we did have, unfortunately, one lead mortality earlier this year, which came in as a rescue but had fatally high levels of lead in its body, in its bloodstream. Looncam 2. Yeah, so Looncam 2, unfortunately, you know, we have it up and running, but the loons are not there. We don't have a pair of loons to show you guys yet. The typical pair, if you've seen it before, you'll know they're a banded pair. And this year, from the start of the season, we've been seeing groups of 3, 4, 5, 6 loons in that territory. And unfortunately, the most recent time we saw a pair in there, they were both unbanded. So it's possible that, you know, that new pair will not nest. It's also possible that they might nest, but at a spot other than the raft that we've set up. And so there's a lot of uncertainty with Looncam 2. We have it up. I think we're going to keep it up until July 8th in case those loons do decide to nest. But yeah, we really don't know if we're going to have loons to show you on there or not. Changes to the nest over the years. There have been only a couple really major changes. So number one is the addition of the nest raft cover, which is intended to be an avian predation guard. That was added within the last 10 to 15 years, I think. It was added before I started at LPC, but not too much before that. The camouflage as well, we've recently started doing a double layer instead of just a single layer to try to give the loons a little bit more protection from the sun and hopefully reduce the temperature on the nest, give them a little more shade. If you look on the sides here, it's sort of hard to see, but there's some plastic mesh going up about 10 inches. That is a chick guard, and that's just to make sure that no chicks get their head or bodies stuck inside the relatively larger squares of the lobster trap mesh. We just want to make sure, you know, if chicks hatch, that they make it to the water and don't get stuck on the raft. Other than that, I guess the major change is that we've introduced rafts that are in the style that you see here. This is a board raft. So we float two types of raft. Mostly we float these board rafts, but on some lakes that have, you know, either a lot of wind and the rafts get pushed around a lot, or they have severe water level fluctuations, we use a log style raft, which is, you know, four large cedar logs that we put together sort of Lincoln log style to form a square. And then we have this, we have foam inside for flotation, we have mesh over it. So they look basically the same as this raft, except the border of them is made out of logs. And then of course the changes to the height that I had mentioned earlier. The material inside? The nest material, you mean? Yeah, so we typically are trying to put down a layer of dirt or loam, and then we have vegetation that we dig up locally and put on there in hopes that it will root down to the raft. What we really want is for these rafts to become basically an artificial island. So we want it to be totally vegetated. If you've looked at the preview of Looncam 2 that Bill linked to in the chat of Looncam 1 yesterday, you'll see that that particular raft has a little bush growing on it. We have a lot of rafts like that throughout the state. So natural vegetation is really what we use, and we try to source it locally because, you know, there are just, you never want to take risks that you're moving something invasive from one place to another. So we do try to get some vegetation from right on that lake to put on the raft. How many lakes in New Hampshire have loons and what's the criteria? So, boy, I know we monitor something like 450 lakes. Not all of those have loons, but all have good potential habitat for loons. I'd say probably between 300 and 400 of them do have loons. Maybe that's a little high. Maybe 250 to 350 have loons. I'd have to double check on our lake list to count up the exact number of lakes that have loons. But the criteria are the lake has to be big enough. So anything less than 50 acres, we typically don't see loons on. And then sort of the geography of the lake plays a role too. So it has to have some sort of nest site. So either an island or a marshy area. Shoreline areas can be used. They tend to be less successful. Typically, loons are looking for a nest site that's on a small island or in a marsh. It has to have a good enough stock of fish. So there are some lakes in New Hampshire that are smaller than 50 acres that have loons, but we think it's because those lakes are stocked. And if they weren't stocked, they might not be big enough to support the loons. Yeah, so that's really it. They should have, a protected area for the loons to raise their chicks, especially when they're really young. But not all of the lakes that have loons have like a protected cove or something, and the loons still manage just fine on them. So, food supply, nest site, and potentially, having a nursery site are the criteria. It also needs to have high water clarity, because loons are visual predators, and if they can't see, they can't, catch fish. So water clarity is important. Depth seems to be pretty important too. A really shallow lake usually won't have loons. Yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, that's a good question. Have we had owls attack a loon? Because on another Looncam recently, I think that was recorded once or maybe a couple times. We haven't documented it here, but as LPC staff were talking about it, when we saw that video, we're not out at night, right? Surveying and watching the loon nests. And we've really only had cameras on a very small number of loon nests. So it's possible it might be a problem that is affecting more loons, and we just don't realize it because, we don't have night vision goggles to be able to watch the nests at night. So it hasn't been well documented, but it could just be because, typical survey methods wouldn't catch it. We do have at least a handful of lakes each year where the volunteers report a big commotion the night before, and then all of a sudden the nest is empty. So it's possible that, an owl might have been by. We just, we don't have a way to prove that that's what happened. So it was a really cool capture on that other Looncam for them to, not cool for the loons, but very interesting and, something that really hasn't been documented before. Yeah, so you guys can't see it, but the red-winged blackbird that's been hanging around the nest all season is actually perched right on top of the camera right now. He's been here since we've been out here, just singing away. Yeah, so before we shut down the broadcast today, I will just put in a plug for our upcoming series of nature talks. We do have a talk tonight with Dr. Ellen Martinson that will be live streamed on our YouTube channel starting at 7 p.m. It's going to be a pretty brief talk, about a half an hour, but she's doing some really amazing work on the emergence of avian malaria as a threat to loons. In 2015, in New Hampshire, we documented the first loon death from avian malaria. Since then, we've found several other birds that have died from avian malaria, both in New Hampshire, in other New England states, and even, I think, at least one from the Midwest. So Dr. Martinson is doing some really, really incredible work, and if you can watch her talk tonight, I encourage you to, because I've seen a version of her talk at a conference, and she's an incredible speaker, and it's a very interesting topic. So that talk is tonight, and then starting in July 8th, running through August 27th, we will have a nature talk series every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. A lot of those talks are on loons, but not all. We have a talk on harriers, a talk on the geology of the lakes region, talk on osprey. So that's going to be a really interesting series. I encourage you to check it out. And the last thing that I will say before we shut down here is that we're really glad that you all have watched and enjoyed the Looncam. At LPC, it really is a membership and donation driven organization. We couldn't do any of this without the support of people who donate or become members. And so if you are able to, if it's within your means, please do consider going to loon.org/support LPC and potentially either becoming a member or making a donation. Great. Thank you guys for watching the Looncam. I hope we have a Looncam 2 for you, but we'll see.
Thank you.